Welcome back, my friend. Pull up a chair, grab yourself a drink, and let me tell you about the legend of Grey Wethers. On the southeastern slopes of Sittaford Tor are two broken stone circles formed of 30 rough blocks of granite. They are known as Grey Wethers, as, it is said from a distance, they look like a flock of sheep grazing. Wether is, of course, another name for sheep. One day, on the boggy uplands near Sittaford Tor, 3 peasants were employed cutting peat. For many weeks they had been employed there carving out the blocks of peat and laying them out to dry in the sun. Before the winter storms set in, the driest peat would be loaded onto ponies using the distinctive crooks or frames which looked something like the prongs of a pitchfork turned up. The peasants would then sell the peat to the Dartmoor farmers for use as fuel during the long, cold Dartmoor winters. As the sun sank from sight, the 3 men gathered up their slicers, budding irons and turfing irons and made their way homewards. Home was a crudely built little hut built of granite boulders with a thatched roof overgrown with mosses and lichens. Some people believe that it is now known as Stack's house. Be that as it may, the house at that time belonged to Rognay, who dwelt there throughout the year. Varnes, who was a friend of Rognay, stayed there every summer, cutting peat with his friend. The third man, who was a stranger to the district, was called Linher. He was an itinerant worker who was employed by the other 2 for the first time this summer. That night after their meal a storm began to rage. The rain beat down, the wind howled, and the thunder roared. "'Tis a wild night," said Rognay. "Thank God for a snug warm house." "I would sooner be out tonight than visit Grey Wethers on a midsummer night," commented Varnes. "The Grey Wethers?" said Linher, looking up. "What is there to be afraid of about them?"
"Hush!" cried Varnes. "Do you not know the story then? Why, the shearing of them would make a man rich for life."
"I am a stranger in these parts," said Linher. "What is this tale? I have a mind to be rich." "I will tell you," said Varnes, "but you will be well advised to avoid Grey Wethers at midsummer. It is an evil place." Many hundreds of years ago, a peasant who went by the name of Zorak, one of a tribe of people worshipping Belus, a sun god, came here to dwell. Zorak found so much favour in the sight of the god that, being one without possessions, he soon grew rich. But Zorak became greedy, and he begrudged having to make sacrifices to the sun god. When the day of the great festival of midsummer came round, and the followers of Belus vied with each other in seeking the choicest offerings to make to him, Zorak went in the early evening to the green slopes of Sittaford Tor to choose one of his flock to sacrifice to the sun god. As he gazed, he found that out of all his flock of 40 sheep, there was none among them that he would willingly bring himself to part with. One of his neighbours possessed several lambs that had been born late in the season, and he decided to steal one of them and sacrifice it in place of one of his own sheep. Belus, who knew what the peasant had done, was filled with anger and decided to punish Zorak. When Zorak returned in the evening to where he had left his flock, he found to his amazement they had vanished, but on the green grass where they had been grazing, 2 circles of upright granite posts were standing in their place. The god had avenged himself. From that day Zorak's fortunes changed, and soon he sickened and died, and was buried beneath a cairn at the top of Cosden Hill. The 2 circles, as you know, still stand there, and every midsummer's eve at midnight the stones take their former shapes, and, as sheep, graze till morning upon the green slopes of Sittaford Tor. "What about the legend?" asked Linher, who had been listening intently. "The legend runs that should anyone succeed in shearing one of these sheep ere sunrise, its fleece, if sprinkled with water that may be found in a deep rock basin on top of Kestor, will turn to gold. But for the shearing, none other than the shears of the dead peasant must be used, and these, it is said, lie buried within the Christ vein, under the cairn beneath which the bones of Zorak rest. The magic shears, as the legend runs, are of no use until they've been dipped into the River Tane at midnight." "There is a rhyme about them," said Rognay. "It contains the secret of shearing the sheep. It is written on a piece of parchment. At midnight by the Tolman, upon the River Tane, the shears within its waters shall carve thy weal or bane. Strike on thy left, then on thy right, red blood the flood shall stain. Beware lest trembling fingers withdraw the blade again. but hold it firmly neath the stream till tress of hair appears, which seize and keep to bind the sheep, then use the magic shears. Her read it through again and again till he had committed the words to memory. Then, returning the parchment to its owner, he sat a long time deep in thought. All winter Linher brooded over the story of Grey Wethers. Finally, he resolved to test out the legend. He would be rich if it were true. The idea became an obsession, and he could hardly wait until summer. At last, a week before Midsummer's Day, the time was ripe. Linher set off for Cosden Hill, and, after a brief search, found the cairn. With the tools he had brought, he set to work, and after a few hours' frantic labour, uncovered the stone coffin. Prizing off the lid, he gazed inside. There was a skeleton, a few amber beads, some fragments, and, proving the story to be true, a pair of rusty shears. Clutching the shears, Linher set off for the Tolman stone on the River Tane. On the way, he filled his flask from the deep pool on top of Kestor. Arriving at the Tolman just before midnight, he knelt down at the river's edge and recited the words he had memorised. At midnight by the Tolman, upon the River Tane, the shears within its waters shall carve thy weal or bane. Strike on thy left, then on thy right. With that he plunged the shears into the river. The water hissed and seethed around them, then a dark cloud seemed to pass across the moon, the air turned chill, and a low, eerie moaning filled the air. Suddenly a loud voice rang out, "Strike! Strike! Crimson blood shall stain the flood, and wet the glistening blade that shears the sheep. Strike! Strike!" Terrified, Linher withdrew the shears, and, as he did so, the foaming, seething water was stained the colour of blood. He gazed in horror, then recalling the warning on the parchment, plunged the shears once more into the river. A peal of mocking laughter filled the valley, and again the voice rang out, "Strike! Strike! See there before thee in the stream, to bind the sheep, fair tresses gleam. Strike! Strike!" Even as the words rang out, a long tress of woman's hair rose to the surface and floated past the rock on which Linher knelt. Spellbound, he watched it float past him. Then, realising it was passing out of reach, he flung himself full length, clutching frantically. Though almost too late, he managed to secure part of the tresses. Fully committed now, Linher set off to Rogner's hut, there to await Midsummer's Eve. Midsummer's Eve saw Linher waiting beside Grey Wethers, and, despite his terror and excitement, somehow he fell asleep. He was awakened by the bleating of sheep. To his delight, the stones had resumed their former shape. He sprang to his feet, and because of the time spent sleeping, had no time to spare. Dawn would soon be breaking, he must work fast. Drawing his shears, and with the short rope he had woven from the tresses, he crept up to the nearest sheep, but startled it shied away. After a lengthy chase, it was at last cornered. Frantically, Linher tied it with his short rope and began shearing as fast as he could. The shears were blunt and it took time. However, piece by piece the fleece dropped to the ground, and the peasant gloated over the fortune that would be his at sunrise. With this thought, he was suddenly aware of a lightening on the eastern horizon. The sun was almost rising. Terrified, Linher tried to speed up his work, but suddenly the knots on the too short rope loosened and the sheep made its escape. Linher was now petrified. Why had he withdrawn the shears from the river? Why had he not immediately grabbed the tresses instead of letting them float by? The shears would have been sharper and the rope would have been longer. He would have completed his task. He cursed himself firstly for having started off on this adventure, and secondly for his stupid folly at the river's edge. Suddenly he remembered the flask of water from Kestor and decided to sprinkle the fleece with it. Before he could make a move, however, he became aware of a sense of doom. Looking up, he saw the herd of sheep, which by now had each assumed gigantic proportions, closing in on him, forming once more a circle around him. Closing. While he stood petrified, suddenly a voice rang out, "Those that seekest to gain the treasure of the dead shall win the fatal gift the grave doth yield instead." The following day, Linher was found dead, pinned below one of the stones which had fallen over on him. Strangers accepted it as a simple accident, but the people of the moors knew the truth, that the Grey Wethers were guarding their treasure. Well, how found you the tale of the Grey Wethers? If you did enjoy it, please subscribe, like, and maybe leave a comment below. And if on your journey home you should hear tales of lost treasures, take care. You never know who's guarding it.